Okay, so among films that I watched last year, I watched less films than just about any year uh, in decades. I was really slack. So, but of the films I did watch, and I kept track on the Letterboxd site that I've recommended to you guys a bunch of times. I should put my Letterboxd address in the comments below. I always forget to do that. But anyway, I keep a record, a diary of what I've watched, and sometimes I rate them. And occasionally I write reviews, and it's kind of a site where you could do all kinds of stuff. I really like it. But so out of all the films I saw last year for the first time, I had like favorites, a favorite list. And at the end of the year, my number one was a German film called LUZ, LUZ. Means Spanish for light, I've been told by Spanish speaking people. I have not researched it on Slack that way. By the way, I'm going to try to talk louder. The sound on my last video is really bad, and I got spoiled by the great sound on my phone, which I am going to use for some videos. I actually made a video about LUZ on my phone, and it turned out to be just crap. So, starting over. It was a hard film to talk about then because I was trying to get into the plot, and the structure of the film is one of the things that makes it so fascinating to me. It's very meticulously structured, non-linearly. Sometimes, what's the word? Some things happen contemporaneously, isochronically, I guess, is one term. But anyway, I just happened upon it on Tubi. And there were a couple other films called LUZ already, on my streaming services. There was already a horror film called LUZ. I forgot what country it was made in from a few years back, and I did try to watch it, and I didn't really. It didn't catch my fancy after the first 20 minutes. I gave up. Then there was another recent one, more recent one, like 2020 LUZ film. Again, I don't know what country it's from. But it was like a LGBTQ, love story, a gay love story between two men, as I understand the plot to be. So this film, LUZ, it kind of blew my mind because it is so retro in the way it's made, and like I said, it's very meticulous, and I guess it'd be easy to dismiss things about it with the argument of style over substance. In other words, the atmosphere and the experimental nature of it, the look, the sound, could for a lot of people trump the narrative. And I think that happened for a really good friend of mine. That was similar to what he had told me, his verdict on it. But if I'm watching it, a few more times, I believe, once again, I just got off work. I believe that the narrative is there. There's not a lot of, the whole thing is leading up towards something happening. And by the time it finally happens, I don't want to say it's anticlimactic, but it's almost like in the Ninth Gate, where the whole film, Boris Baldeck is trying to raise Satan with that book, and in the end, it kills him, but Johnny Depp, as Corso, actually opens the gate and he walks through, and you see the light. And other than Emmanuel Senior being kind of able to fly, you hadn't seen any other supernatural elements for sure. So to me, it was like, whoa, now that's where the movie begins, practically, right? But I get it. There are movies like that. To me, The Witch was like that by Edgar Eggers. I liked the ending, and to me, that was like, okay, now it's a springboard into something else. I'm not saying these movies should have sequels. I'm just saying that's kind of where they choose to cut the story off, where they choose to, the last thing they choose to show us. So LUZ is sort of like that, but just getting to that point is done in a very roundabout fashion. I think it's achieved deftly through editing, through performances, through atmosphere, through cinematography, sound, music. So let me get down to it. It's going to tell you a few technical things. I'll probably write them below too, but I want to give credit where credit's due. Tilman Singer is the director. It was his first feature. I was given the Blu-ray by as a result of me putting in such high favor. Channel patron Terry Mulford acquired a Blu-ray copy for me. Now, it originally had come out on Blu-ray on Vinegar Syndrome. It was very limited. It came with a poster. So now it's on a label called Altered Innocence. Excuse me. Which is like a label, I don't know, / studio / distributor that is doing quite a bit of kind of cutting edge genre stuff, and a lot of it's ending up on Shudder and Tubi. Knife Plus Heart is one. Wild Boys is one. There's a few others, but all those trailers are on the LUZ Blu-ray too. And Tilman Singer's early short films, one's like 10 minutes, one's like 17 minutes. And they both kind of lay the groundwork for what you get with LUZ, which is, I read that it's shot on 16 millimeter. So, interestingly, one of the selling points that I read today, I haven't confirmed it yet, was that Skinamarink, which I reviewed in my last episode, was shot on 16 millimeter. And I talked quite a bit about how they had the very kind of fuzzy, grainy, kind of old school look of the film. Now, LUZ is a lot more polished and bright than that, and it's not slow and it's not as experimental and languid and soundless, but there is a certain amount of grain that comes through in the Blu-ray transfer that I think it's not just like the kind of grain where I've seen transfers like Arrow does, like especially of Django and Cat o' Nine Tails, and there's just the right amount of grain. You have to kind of get used to it at first, because when you see the prints as they're originally done by Blue Underground and Anchor Bay Entertainment, they're completely clean and smooth like they were shot today. So on Blu-ray, when they're retransferring these elements, they start to look more like, to me anyway, like what I remember 70s films as looking like on the screen in the 70s. Mind you, I was very, very young, but I have a good memory. My buddy Bill White can comment on all this with much more perspicacity than I. Is that the right word? But LUZ has that grain. It's not like that grain exactly. It's really more of a deliberate look or feel, and it's very evocative, and I'm sure deliberately, of earlier German genre and art house films. And to me, it's a kind of a crowning achievement of modern genre films from Germany that continue this kind of tradition of the look, the ideas, the music, the atmosphere. It brings to mind some Herzog stuff. It brings to mind especially Angst, the film Angst from the 80s. And it doesn't really remind me of Bluthardt or anything, but it's still, transgressive in its own ways. It's not as graphic, but it is pretty blasphemous and transgressive. I mean, it's got lots of anti-clerical and anti-Catholic rhetoric, and tons and tons of full frontal male and female nudity and such. But I wouldn't call it exactly an exploitation movie. I would definitely call it a serious work. It's in the possession genre, subgenre, I guess. So I'm going to kind of just give you the basic story, not the way I tried to do in the first video I shot, where I tried to go through it the way the movie does. That's for you to watch and piece together yourself the puzzle. But here's the deal. So Luz Carrere is a young woman from South America. She's either from Chile or Colombia. She wears a baseball cap. She has this endearing look. She's very small, very pretty, black hair, and she wears a plain white t-shirt tucked in with, form-fitting black jeans, but not, salaciously curvy, because she's not, and white tennis shoes, and this white backward baseball cap that says Chile on the back. And she's, kind of a tomboy, and it's obvious she's a lesbian, and that's not made a huge deal of, but, the strain of lesbianism in horror films from Europe, runs pretty deep and long, from the lesbian vampire films to, all kinds of these films like nunsploitation and schoolgirl films in Germany. There's always like women having sex with women or women's sexual discovery with each other. So Luz is a jaded character, though. I think she's gone past that. But the core concept of this movie is that it is in the modern day, but due to the events of her earlier life in that kind of atmosphere I just described, with those kind of events, and done similarly to some of those movies in a very horror, nunsploitation, demonic possession kind of set of tropes. That's the root, and it's all coming home to roost now. Now you're not told about her life in between. You're never answered any of these characterization questions. You're led to believe what the characters say or not, to try to believe the evidence of your senses, and just when you do, it elusively changes. So to make it short, Luz encounters a friend. This is this very, very, I think, very sultry German woman named Nora van der Kurt, played by Julia Riedler. I don't know any of these actors in this movie. Luana Velis plays Luz Carrere. Okay. She gets in her cab, and Nora was a fellow student of hers at this Catholic girls' school. And apparently, I don't know if Luz's parents moved to Germany, and that's why she's there, even though she's South American. But she has stayed in Germany since those events. But during those events, she had kind of a crush, involvement, what have you, dalliance, curiosity. I'm sorry, I'm snoring. I'm snoring. That's next. I'm sorry, I'm yawning so much. It's not the company, the subject matter. But anyway, this character's named Margarita. Lilli Lorenz is the actress. So she's kind of a minor character. She's kind of the plot device. Essentially, she was a character that was in this Catholic girls' school run by nuns, and the nuns were very strict, and Margarita found herself pregnant. So what are they going to do about it? So the weird thing is, according to this narrative in the beginning by Nora, which is an unreliable narrator, I'll tell you why, but according to that iteration of Nora, I'm going to put it that way, LUZ somehow found out a way to summon a medium, like a psychic medium, and perform this ritual. Now, it's kind of opaque as to whether this ritual was to find out if she was pregnant, to end the pregnancy, for some other purpose. But the bottom line is when Margarita was completely naked and they put her in a circle of salt, and LUZ had chanted this kind of blasphemous takeoff on the Lord's Prayer, which repeats quite a few times throughout the movie. It's kind of blasphemous, kind of smart ass, kind of crude, something maybe a teenage girl would think of if she were, in the nunnery rebelling in the modern day. It's not like flowery and dramatic. It's upending that kind of dramatic whatever, I'll spare you the recitation of it. So it's a little confused, but apparently a demonic being, an entity, a female entity, it's strongly implied, but never really proven, but it seems likely, comes into the girl Margarita, possesses her. The girls start going crazy at the school. The whole school smells like fish. Of course, they're making kind of a crude allusion to, I guess, the way people say that about dumb guys used to say that about women's menses. And but this is said by Nora, and but Nora's describing it from the first person. So, so it's kind of weird. So it seems Margarita in reconstructions and flashbacks was possessed by this being. I believe she died. There was some scandal. LUZ left the school and I guess tried to shut the thing out of her head. Nora went on and had some kind of jet-setting life elsewhere, and so LUZ just happens to pick her up in the cab. Now, LUZ is, very cold toward her. She's ignoring her. She's playing music. This scene is constructed and reconstructed several times from different vantage points, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. But the gist of it is Nora begins acting pretty unhinged and talking about the events that happened in the convent years earlier, and what happened to Margarita. And LUZ is unnerved. I don't want to say she's scared. I think she's a little too tough to be scared exactly, but she's unnerved, and so she, slowly takes her hands off the steering wheel, unbuckles her seatbelt, and opens the door. So she flies out into the pavement and loses consciousness. So the cab crashes, and Nora makes her way to a bar. Nora begins to, and this is how the movie begins. Nora begins talking to Dr. Rossini, a major character here in the bar, who kind of resembles the actor, what's his name, Erwin Lieder? I can't remember, who played in Angst. He has a very classic Germanic look. He's in the short films by Tilman Singer as well. But his name is Jan Bluthardt. So Dr. Rossini has a pager, and she's like, "Are you a doctor?" And he's like, "Yes." And, he's kind of blowing her off. And, it's probably set in the 90s since the pager is such a major, maybe even earlier, this is such a major point. They don't have cell phones. And that would dovetail with my theory that this is kind of a homage to that era films of German cinema. Another cool German horror film from that period that's very stylized is Der Fan, or The Fan. That's one of my very favorites. I reviewed that on here ages ago. So Anyway, Nora gradually kind of becomes more and more seductive to the doctor, finds out he's a psychotherapist, he's got an appointment coming up, and, she starts to get him really drunk and then apparently seduce him. And then when they kiss, energy is exchanged between them. It's an incredible effect. It's on the poster too. A great, incredible image. And something that's been done before, and I've definitely seen it in comic books. I haven't seen it done quite this smoothly uh, and effectively as in this movie. Just like the soul going through the mouth into the other being. And then that's the end of Nora. Nora is like a puppet with her strings cut. So Nora is really just a host all along. So now this being is inside of Dr. Rossini, and his appointment turns out to be at this building where they're doing an interview with this girl named Luz Carrere, who comes into the place just on her own after having scooped herself up from the pavement earlier. Again, all these pieces don't fit together until the movie progresses, but the movie begins with her entering the building and then goes to the doctor and Nora, and then goes to what's happening in the building, where where Luz is going. And there's two people. There's a lady named Bertillon, and she's armed. She seems to be maybe like some kind of intelligence agent, like a whatever would be the German equivalent of CIA agent or FBI, maybe would be more likely. And then there's a guy named Olart, and these guys have hired Dr. Rossini. They've called on him to try to find out what is wrong with this traumatized woman, Luz, and to reconstruct her recent memory and find out, if a crime was committed, what's going on. You're never really told exactly why they're selected or why they select Rossini or their ultimate goal in doing this. And if they do, it flashed by me. So if they do, I apologize. I need to watch the movie a few more times. But you have to kind of go with it because that's the thing. Then all your characters come together. And when they come together, basically Rossini, who is now possessed by this entity, is in charge of hypnotizing Luz and having her relive the events that happened just prior to the beginning of the film. And a lot of it's done with mime, like her driving in the car. She's not really in the car, she's sitting in a chair, or listening to music, and it starts flashing back and forth, and you start seeing in her mind and in our view, you see the demonic entity manifest as both Rossini and as Nora in different states of dress and undress and bloodiness and non-bloodiness. And, essentially you're building towards Rossini just going feral, and obviously he has malefic intent towards Luz. So, that's why Nora found him. That's what I think. She knew he was going to be called there, and she would find Luz. Some power she had, She's a demon. It's a demon, whatever. And it's never given a name that I can discern of its own. So anyway, it's in Rossini, inside of Rossini for most of the rest of the film, and he gradually just gets unwound, and Bertillon and Olart witness this acting out, and there's like the flashbacks with the school and the convent and the ritual, and then Rossini kind of goes nuts. He hypnotizes Bertillon and stops her from moving. She's going to become his psychic slave. Tells her to keep her gun ready, I guess to ward her off as a threat. Then Olart is, recording all this in this other sound room, and he's freaking out. And so Rossini strips down. He starts to dress in drag. His nose is bleeding, which Nora's nose is bleeding. And then when he tries to attack Olart, Olart smashes him with some sound equipment, smashes his face, and then he's bleeding everywhere, but he still has this cold stare, this austerity. And It's very chilling, and he's completely nuts, and he's walking around in this dress with all this blood on his face, and his gestures are really inhuman and inscrutable. Like I said, this is a very measured, very mannered film. It seems like everything was put perfectly in place for a reason. Some people might be turned off by that kind of very hermetic direction. I think in this one, I think in many instances it's great. I think in this instance it's really good because those scenes I mentioned in the movie starting, they're like in medium to long shots. Lighting is beautiful, predominantly blue. It has a look of those earlier German films I mentioned. And the music is reminiscent of the krautrock groups that started doing soundtracks to these kind of movies. Like Klaus Schulze did the soundtrack to Angst. And of course, Popol Vuh, who was an early krautrock group, they ended up becoming, Werner Herzog's house band, pretty much. And, they did the, scores to Nosferatu, the vampire, and various others of his. Very atmospheric stuff, can be very creepy stuff. Minimalist at times. The soundtrack has all the sounds. A lot of mostly synthesizer, but other sounds too, and but incredibly evocative. So he's kind of created just an incredible tableau for you in the beginning, and then gradually, like I said, through these flashbacks and reconstructions, tells the story that I've just told you. So what's the payoff? That's the thing. Well, it finally gets to where LUZ sees Margarita, the girl, and she's naked, and she's coming up from the circle of salt, and she's basically telling LUZ, to kiss her. And so the idea is that I think the idea is that LUZ loved her. That there was a sexual attraction between them, and that this pregnancy, LUZ was trying to determine, like I said, either is it real or can it be aborted? I don't know if her motives were that severe, but if she's gonna actually start doing real rituals inside of a convent, and she calls in a medium, well, so obviously LUZ isn't just this blasphemous, mischievous lesbian girl who ends up becoming this kind of cynical cab driver years later. But we just see touches of this. So for a long time, we see Marguerite. Of course, the actress is totally naked. And the room where they've been recreating this is filled with fog. It's slowly filled with fog. And Rossini's walking in and out, doing crazy things. And, LUZ is coming out of the hypnosis. She's kind of she's segueing from reliving what happened to her right before the movie started to the flashbacks very clearly of what happened those years ago at the convent. And then now she's faced, she thinks, with Margarita, and she feels this, emotion and I guess remorse and attraction and whatever. And so Margarita is kind of toying with her, but we look in the shifts of frames and positioning of the actors, and basically it's all a scene, his body that is being perceived as or portrayed as Margarita. It's still that entity making LUZ see all this, and the flashbacks of the cab, what happened in the cab that they start piling on later as it goes on in LUZ's mind. It's a literal, that's showing us literally what happened as opposed to the recreation and just talking about it. And and when they do that, you see the events. In the back seat, yes, is Nora, and then sometimes Nora with blood, and then sometimes it'll switch to Rossini, inside of that scene. Sometimes it'll cut even, you know, shot to shot. Like in one shot, you're seeing an angle of Nora, and then Luz is talking, and then you see a quick angle of the character, and it's obviously it's Rossini in a dress with the blood dripping down, and they keep fragmenting it. So maybe it's beating you over the head, but obviously, yes, it's the entity. It's been the entity all along. Rossini is the entity through the body of Rossini is re-experiencing all of the stuff from earlier that night and all those years ago, back and forth, through time, isochronically, like I said, with Luz. And, I kept wondering, is Luz going to come out of it? Is she going to fight it? What's going to happen? And what are these other characters going to do? So Lard is kind of locked into the sound room, and Bertillon is still just kind of somnambulant. So finally, all this imagery kind of comes to a head, and yeah. So Luz gets away from the room and goes back down to the lobby where she was entering in the beginning. And Bertillon follows her, and, she's got an earpiece. And you hear Olar saying, shoot her, over and over again, like frantically. But instead, Bertillon lets her go. And she just casually goes off into the night. Of course, where we're at is that Olart has figured out what's going on pretty much, and he's freaking out. He's scared, and he figures Bertillon will put a stop to this demon while it's in human form, even if it means killing Luz, before it goes on to possess other people and cause more carnage. But she doesn't. So I think this plot's pretty interesting and compelling, and well wrought. However, like I said, there's a lot of things missing. There's a lot of maybe payoffs people would want to see, maybe questions people would have about what does it all mean. But I think if you follow the dream logic of it, if that's what you're into, if that's what you're vibing with, like I was, then that takes you through this journey. That's the first time you see it. Then the next time you see it, if you remember really well what happened the first time, you're okay. I was a little fuzzy on a couple things, so when I watched it the second time, I got a little knocked off course and had to rewind and pay more attention, because I'd been kind of just sucked into the vibe of the movie, the feel of the movie. And I think that's where we're going to have to look at Tilman Singer as a major emerging talent, in my opinion. But we're going to have to look and see, is narrative film what he's, going to be able to pull off. His newest movie is called Cuckoo, and it has, several known actors and then a lot of foreign actors I wasn't familiar with, but like John Malkovich is in it. And oddly, several, 2 or 3 different actors who have played in MCU films. I'm trying to remember them. Gemma Chan, who played Cersei in the Eternals, is in it, and 2 others. And you would immediately know I'm talking about. I mean, it's not like Chris Hemsworth or anything, Robert Downey Jr., but someone known for playing in those roles. So ultimately, eventually, every actor will do an MCU film and play an MCU role, apparently. So, I don't know what Cuckoo's about. I know it's getting a wider release than his other movies. Obviously, I don't know when it's playing in wide release. Not sure if it's played festivals yet. It is listed as a 2023 film. So that, I think, will be the confirmation one way or another of where he's going with his storytelling, his mode of storytelling. Is it going to be more atmosphere over narrative, or can he cleave the two unto each other? Does he succeed or fail in this movie? Like I said, my good buddy said, I don't think he thought he did, and I get that. I thought he did to the extent he wished to. Now, we could second guess him, you know, and say, well, he probably should have done this, that, or the other, or he could have done this, that, or the other. But it was his story, and it was an original story. Obviously, influenced and inspired by a whole vein of films and literature, several different horror subgenres, and mostly from Germany, but also from other countries. The look, the vibe, the ideas, the tropes. But I think through all that, even though she's not as well-rounded as probably a lot of people would like her to be, the titular character is compelling. I do think the actress is great at portraying her as who she is now, great at portraying her who she was in the convent, great at portraying her in the hypnotized state, and the relived state, and then in the coming out of its state and the feelings for this girl after all these years coming back and her reaching out, because basically Margarita says, kiss me. Though it's really the body of Rossini. And when, you don't see them kiss and the transfer happen, but it's obvious from what's said by Olart that has happened, and therefore Rossini's body has died, or just puppet with his strings cut. But presenting himself as Margarita was a way to finish sucking and lose. So for all these years, this demon has coveted Luz as its chosen host for whatever reason. Was she in love with in love with Luz? Wanted to feel what it's like to be her, wanted to feel her body being inside of her body. So a lot of the lesbian horror overtones and undertones, but mostly overtones, that are very familiar to a lot of us viewers of European, what some call European trash cinema, but we'll call European genre cinema, are very familiar with. A lot of people, I don't have a lot of people, but some of the few people I know that are regular viewers of this channel and supporters of this channel know exactly what I'm talking about. So I think it does succeed as more than pastiche. But I do think it creates or recreates certain space and envelops you within that space and plays with your mind through quick cutting and bait and switch with the actors and characters. But all along, essentially, there's a demon that wants this girl for years, because this girl unleashed the demon. Really, she was responsible for summoning it, or her, and now this succubus, which it could be a succubus, if you want to think about it that way, it's sucking the life energy out of someone, but then it's going into their body, and the body it has is, I've seen this in tons of horror and science fiction, books, comics, movies. But I love the way it's visually done in this movie. Minimalist, but perfect to me. I might use one of the major posters with that imagery as my thumbnail for the video. Anyway, I'm signing off. I just wanted to get a succinct review here. I'm sorry if I've rambled or if I've confused anyone. It can be a confusing movie to describe if you start getting into the different layers and levels of it and all the little ships. But I think that's what makes it interesting. I think the soundtrack is incredible, whether you like the movie or not. I think the soundtrack is amazing, and I love the look of it, and I really, it's going to definitely be one of my kind of pet favorites, and I hope more people will watch it. I've been trying to get everybody I know to watch it. My friend earlier who had an opinion about it that I mentioned, um, he's the only one that's watched it. Well, okay, my friend Sean Lee Levin did watch it at my recommendation. Now, he really loved it, but I've recommended it to a bunch of other people, and everybody's like, yeah, I'll watch it eventually. So you know, I don't know if making this video will make you want to watch it more, or if you'll just be like, whatever, man. There goes Henry going on about that goddamn LUZ shit again. Anyway, there's a nice extra on this Blu-ray. Also, there's a long interview with Tilman Singer, and he based the character of LUZ, a lot of her personality and background, on his own girlfriend who was from Colombia, South America. And Singer is now trilingual, English, Spanish, and German. And, he liked mixing the Spanish and German languages in the movie. And there's kind of a recurring, I guess, joke, if you want to call it that, where a character, LUZ will suddenly start talking in German, and a character will go, you know German? Because she's only been speaking in Spanish. So, of course, I half the time I can't even tell the difference. I'm just reading the subtitles. I'm just going with it, man, okay? All right, love you guys. That's it. Take care. The gang says, rock on. Hey, man, did it work? No. All right, let's try that again.